Nobody in that ballroom approached Zariah Brooks. Not the billionaires. Not the men with earpieces standing by the door. Not a single person in that room full of power moved toward her. But a 7-year-old boy in a tuxedo did. He crossed the entire floor, ignored every bodyguard, sat down beside her, and whispered 4 words that had nothing to do with a child asking for company, and everything to do with bringing down the most feared empire in Seoul. Zariah Brooks came to this gala to close a diamond deal. She is leaving with something that could burn this entire city down. If you've ever wondered what happens when a child sees exactly what the adults are trying to hide, welcome. Subscribe. Because what Leo knows? Nobody in that room was supposed to survive hearing it. The boy's name she would learn later was Leo. But in that moment, sitting across from her with both hands flat on the white tablecloth and eyes that had no business being that steady in a child's face, he didn't offer his name at first. He offered something else entirely. He told her the number in her business account. Not approximately, not a rough estimate the way someone might guess at wealth in a room like this. The exact figure, down to the decimal point. He said it the way a banker reads a statement, clean, factual, unbothered, and then watched her face with the quiet patience of someone who already knew what her reaction would be. Zariah did not gasp. She had trained herself out of gasping years ago. But her hand stilled on her glass, and that was enough. "I'm not trying to alarm you," Leo said, adjusting his bow tie with one finger. "I just needed you to understand that I'm serious." Zariah set her glass down with the careful precision of a woman deciding whether to stand up and walk away or stay and find out what on earth was happening. She looked at him, really looked, and registered what she hadn't fully processed from across the room. This child was not performing with confidence. He had it, the natural, settled kind that most grown men spend decades trying to manufacture. "How old are you?" she asked. "7, he said. "Relevant." She almost laughed. She didn't. "Who are you?" He glanced once, briefly, deliberately, toward the center of the room, toward the man in the charcoal suit. Min-seok John, the man who moved like gravity, the man Zariah had filed under "not my table" 20 minutes ago. "His son," Leo said simply. The temperature in Zariah's chest dropped 3 degrees. She did not look toward Min-seok. She was far too professional for that. Instead, she kept her eyes on Leo and recalculated everything she thought she understood about the last 5 minutes. A child prodigy, the heir of the most feared man in Seoul, who had crossed an entire ballroom of dangerous people to sit beside a stranger from Lagos, and opened the conversation by demonstrating he had accessed her private financial records. "You hacked my accounts," she said. It wasn't a question. "Only the business ones," Leo said, as if this distinction were entirely reasonable. "The personal ones weren't necessary." Wonderful, Zariah thought. Absolutely wonderful. She picked up her glass again, took one slow sip, set it back down. "What do you want, Leo?" And that was the moment his expression shifted, just slightly. The boardroom composure cracked open by exactly 1 millimeter, enough to reveal something real underneath. Not fear, not a weakness, something closer to the quiet, tired weight of a child who had been carrying a problem too large for one person and had finally found someone he'd calculated, literally calculated, could help him carry it. "My father's most trusted advisors," he said, his voice dropping below the ballroom noise, "are planning to take everything from him, from the inside, and he doesn't see it because he trusts them." Zariah held very still. "I've been watching them for 11 weeks, Leo continued. "I have documentation, encrypted files, transaction records, communication logs, everything. But I can't move it without triggering their counter-surveillance. And I can't bring in anyone from inside my father's circle because they're all compromised." He paused, looked at her directly. "You're the only person who walked into this building tonight with no connections to my father's network. No alliances, no debts, no surveillance flag. You came through the East Gate, which bypasses the primary security scan. You probably didn't know that, but I did. And I've been watching your professional profile for 6 weeks." Zariah stared at him. "You're 7, she said. "Yes," he agreed patiently. And you've been running counter-surveillance on your father's inner circle. For 11 weeks. Yes. The ballroom hummed around them. Crystal glasses, murmured deals, the easy, dangerous laughter of men who controlled things. Zariah looked at this boy, this impossibly composed, terrifyingly intelligent 7-year-old, and felt something she hadn't felt in a professional setting in a long time. She felt genuinely outmaneuvered. She leaned forward slightly. What exactly are you asking me to do? Leo reached into the inside pocket of his perfectly tailored jacket and produced a small folded card. He slid it across the table with 2 fingers. Tomorrow morning, he said, my father will receive a recommendation from his education board suggesting I need a specialized English tutor. Someone with a West African linguistic background, Lagos dialect specifically, to assist with an international communications module. Zariah unfolded the card. It had an address on it. The recommendation already exists in the system, Leo said. I put it there this afternoon. All you have to do is show up. She looked up from the card. You fabricated an academic recommendation. I optimized an existing process, he said, with the faintest suggestion of a 7-year-old trying not to look proud of himself. This time, Zariah did laugh. Short, sharp, involuntary, the kind that escapes before you authorize it. And just like that, without fully deciding to, she was in. She told herself on the drive back to her hotel that she was simply going to observe. One visit, one look at the situation. If it was as serious as Leo described, she would point him towards someone more qualified. A lawyer, an investigator, someone whose job description actually included dismantling criminal conspiracies inside Korean Mafia estates. She repeated this to herself 4 more times before she fell asleep. She showed up at the address the next morning anyway. The Minseok estate did not announce itself the way wealthy properties do in movies. No dramatic gates, no guards with visible weapons. What it had instead was something more unsettling. Quietness. A particular, managed kind of quiet that told you immediately that every detail of this environment had been intentionally controlled. The kind of quiet that had eyes. A staff member met her at the entrance. Perfectly courteous. Perfectly neutral. She was shown through the main hallway. Marble floors, clean lines, walls that held artwork that Zariah recognized immediately as pieces that had passed through the highest-level auction houses in Asia and into a formal sitting room to wait. She waited exactly 4 minutes before Min Seok-jan walked in. In the ballroom, he had been striking in an abstract way, a figure you noted and filed. In person, in a room this size, he was something else. He moved without noise. He occupied space without announcing it. He looked at Zariah with dark, measured eyes that held the particular quality of a man who had learned long ago that the most valuable information comes from listening, not speaking. Ms. Brooks, he said. His English was precise, accented, entirely deliberate. Leo tells me your background is in international communications consulting. Among other things, Zariah said, matching his stillness. He studied her for 3 seconds. The kind of 3 seconds that felt like a full audit, and then nodded once. He's been asking for a tutor with very specific credentials for several months. You are the first person who has satisfied all his requirements. Zariah kept her expression professionally warm and internally filed that sentence directly next to everything Leo had told her the night before. Several months. Leo had been planning this particular move for months. This child had a longer strategic timeline than most executives she'd worked with. She was hired by the end of the meeting. Miro. Maze. That was the word that settled in Zariah's mind on her 3rd day inside the Minseok estate. Not because the building was architecturally complex, though it was, but because of the people in it. She had spent 2 decades reading rooms for a living, evaluating the weight of a piece against its setting, understanding what a space tells you about the person who designed it, and what the Minseok estate told her, once she stopped looking at the walls and started looking at the staff, was deeply uncomfortable. It started with small things, the kind of details that don't register as significant until you've noticed 3 of them in a row. The head of household staff, a composed woman named Director Yoon, made phone calls in the West Corridor between 11 and 11:15 every morning. Not unusual on its own, except the West Corridor had no surveillance cameras. Zariah had clocked their positions on day 1, The gap was deliberate. The evening security rotation changed at a time that created a 4-minute window near the estate's secondary server room. 4 minutes was nothing, unless you knew what you were doing. Then it was more than enough. And the external catering company that serviced the estate's private events had been contracted 8 months ago. Right around the time, Zariah calculated quietly, that Leo had begun his 11-week watch. Piece by piece, the picture assembled itself. She brought none of this to Leo immediately. She let it sit. I turned it over, checked her own logic for holes the way she would check a stone setting for flaws before declaring it sound. By the 4th day, she had no more holes. By the 5th day, she walked into Leo's study, a room that looked, to anyone who opened the door, like a standard child's workspace. Organized books, a desk, a window overlooking the garden, and said quietly, "Your staff situation is worse than you told me." Leo looked up from his desk. He had been writing something in a language she was fairly sure wasn't English, Korean, or French. He closed the notebook. "How many on?" he asked. "That I'm certain of? 4. That I suspect? 7. He nodded slowly with the particular expression of someone who had already run this calculation and was relieved that someone else had arrived at the same number. "Come with me," he said. He led her to the library. The Min Seok library was the kind of room that made people lower their voices automatically. Floor-to-ceiling shelving, the smell of old paper and cedar, afternoon light coming in at an angle that turned everything gold. It looked like a sanctuary. It looked like the last place in the estate where anything covert was happening. Leo walked to the far corner, moved a specific stack of architectural reference books aside with practiced ease, and pressed his palm flat against the lower shelf panel. It released with a soft, pneumatic hiss. Beneath the floorboards, in a space that had clearly been custom-built and personally designed, was the most sophisticated personal tech setup Zariah had ever seen outside of a professional intelligence environment. 3 screens, a compact server stack, cables organized with the obsessive neatness of someone who understood that disorder introduced error. A second keyboard that appeared to interface with the estate's central smart home system. Zariah stood at the edge of it and was quiet for a moment. "You built this yourself," she said. "The hardware layout, yes," Leo said, dropping into the single chair in front of the screens with the ease of someone sitting in their most comfortable place in the world. "The core architecture took me about 4 months. The integration with the estate system took another 6 weeks because my father's security team updated the access protocols in March, and I had to rebuild from the inside." "You were 8 months old doing this." She paused. 7 years old doing this." "I'll be 8 in December," he offered, as if this were helpful context. Zariah pressed her fingers to her temple briefly. Then she pulled up the second stool she now noticed had been placed beside his chair. Already there, already waiting, and sat down. "Show me what you have," she said. And he did. For the next 90 minutes, Leo walked her through 11 weeks of intelligence work with the methodical clarity of someone who had been preparing to present this briefing for a very long time. Transaction records showing irregular fund movements through 3 of Min Seok's most senior advisors. Encrypted communication logs he had intercepted and partially decoded. A timeline of security protocol changes that consistently created exploitable gaps. Not by accident, but by design. The picture that emerged was precise and damning. A coordinated internal operation. Not a rival organization moving against Min Seok from the outside, but his own people, quietly, patiently, dismantling the infrastructure of his empire from within. Rerouting assets, building leverage, creating the conditions for a complete seizure of control at a single, well-timed moment. "The auction," Leo said, pointing to a date on his timeline. 3 weeks from now, my father is hosting a private collection event at the estate. 60 guests, closed security perimeter. The staff will control the entire internal network." Zariah looked at the date. She looked at the scope of what she was seeing on those 3 screens. She looked at the 7-year-old boy who had built an intelligence operation under his father's library floor, recruited a stranger from a ballroom, and had the patience and precision to map a conspiracy that grown men with resources had missed entirely. "Leo," she said carefully, "does your father know any of this?" The boy's expression shifted. That 1 millimeter crack again. The real thing, underneath all the composure. Not fear, Something more complicated. The look of a child who loves someone and has been carrying the weight of protecting them alone for longer than anyone should. No, he said, and I need to make sure that when he finds out, it comes with proof he cannot dismiss. Because if I tell him without it, they'll deny everything, and the people he trusts will turn it back on him. He looked at her steadily. I need him to see it the way I see it. I need him to see it clearly. And I need someone he can't accuse of being part of his world to be the one standing there when he does. The library was quiet. The afternoon light had shifted to something softer, closer to evening. Somewhere in the estate, a door closed, staff moving through their routines. 4 of them, at least, doing something other than what they were paid to do. Zariah exhaled slowly. Okay, she said, then we have 3 weeks, and we're going to need a plan. Leo's expression didn't change dramatically, but something in his posture settled. The kind of settling that happens when a person has been bracing against a weight alone, and someone finally puts their hands on the other side of it. He turned back to his screens, pulled up a second window, a document already partially written, already titled, already structured. I started drafting it in February, he said simply. Zariah stared at him. February, she repeated. I told you I'd been watching for 11 weeks. Leo, it is currently April. He blinked. I was optimistic about how quickly I'd find the right person. And this time when Zariah laughed, it wasn't short or sharp or involuntary. It was full and genuine, and it filled the library like something that had been needed in that room for a very long time. Zariah flew to Seoul to sell diamonds, and somehow ended up in a basement war room with a 7-year-old who drafted their escape plan in February. If Leo's commitment to his father isn't making you feel something, drop a like, because this child did not come to play, and neither did this channel. The tracker was Leo's idea. The coffee was Zariah's. She had spent 3 days watching Min Seok's morning routine with the patient. Lateral attention she normally reserved for evaluating stone quality under variable light. Not staring, never staring, just nothing. The way a trained eye absorbs detail without announcing itself. He took his coffee at 8:15 every morning in the East sitting room. The same chair, the same cup. White ceramic, no handle. The kind favored by people who appreciate restraint in their aesthetics. He read physical documents, not screens. He signed nothing digitally. He was, in every observable way, a man who had survived this long by keeping the most important things analog, which meant the only way to track his movements during the auction, when the estate would be locked down tight and Zariah and Leo would need to know exactly where he was at every moment to keep him safe, was to get close enough to place something on him that his own security team wouldn't detect. Leo had built the tracker himself. It was roughly the size of a shirt button. It broadcast on a frequency that ran beneath the estate's standard sweep parameters. He had tested it 4 times and looked quietly delighted with himself each time. The hard part, he had told Zariah the night before, is proximity. He doesn't let people get close without reason. Leave that part to me, Zariah had said. And so at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning, Zariah Brooks walked into the East sitting room carrying 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one unnecessary, turned the corner toward the hallway a fraction faster than was quite advisable, and walked directly into Min Seok John. The collision was perfectly calibrated. Enough force to be convincing. Enough control to ensure that her coffee went primarily onto the floor and not onto a man whose dry cleaning bill she genuinely did not want to be responsible for. She stumbled. He caught her arm, reflexively, firmly, and for approximately 2 seconds they were close enough that the tracker in Zariah's palm transferred cleanly to the inner lining of his jacket cuff. Then she straightened. He released her arm. I'm so sorry, she said, with the exact expression of professional mortification appropriate to the situation. I wasn't watching where I was going. Are you? I'm fine, he said, and then he didn't move. He looked at her. Not the way he had looked at her in their first meeting. That full audit, top to bottom, professional assessment. This was different, quieter. The look of someone who has just noticed something unexpected in a context where they anticipated nothing surprising and is deciding what to do with that information. Zariah held the look. She didn't fill the silence. She had learned a long time ago that the person who speaks first in a silence like this is the person who blinks first, and she had not come this far to blink. Leo speaks very highly of your teaching, Minseok said finally. He's an exceptional student, Zariah said. He doesn't say that about people easily. A pause. Or often. Something shifted in the air between them. Not romantic. Not yet, not exactly. Something more fundamental than that. The particular recognition that passes between two people who are both, in their separate ways, very good at reading situations, and have each just registered that the other one is also very good at reading situations. Min Seok's eyes moved to the spilled coffee on the floor, then back to her. I'll have someone clean that up, he said. Thank you, Zariah said. He walked on. She watched him go. In her earpiece, a discreet piece Leo had insisted she wear during all active operations, which was how a 7-year-old described his own household activities. She heard a small, satisfied sound. Tracker is live, Leo said quietly. The signal is clean. Zariah bent to pick up her empty cup, keeping her face angled away from the corridor cameras. You're welcome, she murmured. A pause, then, from the earpiece, with the faintest trace of something that in any other child would have been called smugness. You spilled a very good coffee. Leo. I'm just noting it. Focus. Focused. Another pause. It was still a waste of a good coffee. Zariah stood up, pressed her lips together hard against a smile, and walked back toward the library. 17 days until the auction. The estate changed the week before the event. It was subtle. The kind of shift you feel before you can name it. The staff moved with slightly different energy. Certain corridors that had been freely accessible developed reasons to be occupied at inconvenient times. The external catering team arrived 3 days early, which no legitimate catering operation needed to do. And Director Yoon's 11 o'clock calls in the West Corridor extended to 15 minutes. Leo tracked all of it. He updated his timeline with the methodical focus of someone playing a game they had spent months preparing for and were finally watching arrive. Zariah tracked Min Seok. Not his location. The tracker handled that. She tracked his awareness, trying to read whether any instinct in him had begun to register what she and Leo could see clearly. Watching for the particular tension that appears in a careful man's face when something he can't name has started to feel wrong. She saw it on the Thursday before the auction, a flicker, there and gone. Over a document that should have been routine. She noted it, said nothing, filed it. The auction night arrived dressed in the same quiet, expensive authority as every other event the Minseok estate hosted. 60 guests. A private collection of pieces that moved through the room in the careful hands of white-gloved staff. Conversation that ran in low, controlled registers. The particular hum of a room where everyone present was used to paying extraordinary amounts of money without letting their face show it. Zariah was stationed near the collection, legitimately as a jewelry consultant advising on 3 of the pieces. She wore the burgundy gown again. She carried her professional evaluation kit, magnification loupe, UV light pen, a specialized cleaning compound in a small sealed case that she had repurposed for a function that had nothing to do with diamonds. In the library beneath the floorboards, Leo was at his screens. In Minseok's jacket cuff, the tracker pulsed quietly. At 9:47, the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming. Every light in the estate, interior and exterior simultaneously, cut to absolute black in the span of a single second. The kind of coordinated blackout that doesn't happen by accident and doesn't happen without someone on the inside controlling the breaker architecture. The room reacted the way rooms full of powerful people always react to sudden darkness. A sharp collective intake of breath, the scrape of chairs, a cascade of phone screens lighting up like scattered stars. Controlled panic, the kind that precedes real panic by about 90 seconds. Zariah was already moving before the gasp finished. I have the floor plan, Leo said in her earpiece, his voice utterly steady. The secondary corridor to your left is clear. The door at the end opens to the service hall. Go now. She went. Your father, she said under her breath, navigating by memory in the faint blue glow of emergency lighting that had clicked on at a lower level. Where is he? East wing. He's not moving. There are 4 heat signatures around him that weren't on the guest list. A pause. The catering team. Zariah's jaw tightened. How many total? 7. 3 in the main hall managing the guests. 4 surrounding my father. Another pause, shorter this time, filled with the quiet sound of rapid keystrokes. I'm locking the east wing doors from the inside. It'll contain them temporarily, but they'll override it in about 4 minutes. The override key is hardwired. Then I have 4 minutes. 3.5 now. She reached the service corridor. The estate's smart home integration lit a single floor panel at ankle height, just enough to navigate by. Leo's work. He had pre-programmed the emergency pathway the week before and said nothing about it until this moment, which meant he had been carrying that particular contingency plan in his back pocket for days. Leo, she said, moving fast, when this is over, we are having a very serious conversation about what you tell me in advance. Noted, he said, with the tone of someone who would absolutely not be changing their approach. Turn right. She turned right. The east wing door was a reinforced interior panel. The kind of door that said this section of the building is different from the rest of the building without advertising it. Through it, she could hear voices. Controlled, professional, not shouting, which was more frightening than shouting. Amateur threats raise their voices. People who do this for a living don't need to. Zariah, Leo said, the cleaning compound in your kit, the one in the sealed case. I know, she said. Aerosolized at close range, the active compound produces approximately 45 seconds of corneal disruption. Not harmful, but disorienting enough to... Leo, I know, I repurposed it. I'm the one who told you about it. A beat. I was confirming you remembered. I remembered. She opened the sealed case. The compound was a specialized solution she used professionally to clean high-porosity gemstones. Completely legitimate, entirely legal and capable, when dispersed rapidly in an enclosed space, of producing a brief but effective sensory disruption that had absolutely nothing to do with diamonds. She had run this calculation herself in the library 2 weeks ago. She had said nothing to Leo about it at the time. 3 days later, he had added it to the contingency plan without comment, which told her he had run the same calculation independently and arrived at the same conclusion. They were, she had decided, extremely similar kinds of thinkers, which was either very useful or very alarming, depending on the moment. Door, Leo said. Now. She went through. What followed happened in 41 seconds by her internal count. Faster than planning, cleaner than chaos. The compound deployed in the enclosed space of the East Wing antechamber. 4 professional men in catering uniforms who had very much not come to serve appetizers stumbled, disoriented, enough for Zariah to move between them and reach the interior door where Min-seok stood. Still, composed, already facing her direction, as if some instinct had told him which way the solution was coming from. He looked at her. She looked at him. Behind her, she could hear Leo cycling the estate's full lighting system back online. Corridor by corridor, section by section, methodical and deliberate. The way you restore order when you have been the one holding the circuit map in your hands the entire time. Ms. Brooks, Min-seok said. His voice was completely level. His eyes were not. We need to move, Zariah said, and then we need to talk. He moved. The guests were escorted out within the hour. Min-seok's core security team, the ones Leo had verified were clean, managed the process with the practiced efficiency of people who had been briefed for exactly this kind of contingency, because Leo had quietly ensured they had been. The 4 men from the East Wing were contained. The 3 in the main hall, disoriented by the blackout and the sudden restoration of order, were secured before they could act. Director Yoon was found in the West Corridor at 11:03, making a phone call. She was escorted to the study by 2 people who did not ask her any questions, which she seemed to find more frightening than if they had. Zariah changed out of the gown, put on the clean clothes she had left in the library 3 days ago. Also pre-planned, she would find out later, also on Leo's timeline, and walked into Min-seok's private study at 11:27, with a tablet under her arm and a particular expression on her face that her clients in Lagos had learned over the years meant, I have something to show you, and you are not going to enjoy looking at it, but you need to. Leo was already there. He was standing beside the desk, hands clasped behind his back, in the posture of a person who has been waiting, not impatiently, but with the kind of readiness that comes from knowing you have done everything you could to prepare for this moment. He had changed out of his school clothes into a clean white shirt and dark trousers. He looked, Zariah thought, impossibly young and impossibly resolved at the same time. Min-seok was seated. He looked at his son first, then at Zariah, then back at his son. Something moved across his face that he did not fully manage to contain. Zariah set the tablet on the desk. She did not sit down. She stood the way she stood when she was presenting a professional assessment. Steady, clear, without apology. 11 weeks ago, she said, your son identified an internal coordination operation being run by 7 members of your household and advisory staff. He documented it. He built an intelligence framework to track it. And when he determined that the operation was approaching its execution window, he identified an external asset, me, and engineered my introduction into this estate in order to provide independent verification and operational support. Min-seok did not speak. Tonight was the execution window. The auction was the trigger event. Zariah turned the tablet to face him. What you're looking at is 11 weeks of transaction records, communication intercepts, and security protocol analysis. Every document is time-stamped and cross-referenced. It's complete, it's clean, and it was built entirely by your son. The room was quiet in the way that very large things are quiet just before they settle into their permanent shape. Min-seok looked at the tablet. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he would have liked to disbelieve, slowly, carefully, with the full weight of a mind that knows how to evaluate evidence, and cannot, no matter how much he might have preferred otherwise, find a flaw in what he's seeing. Then he looked up at Leo. Leo met his father's eyes without flinching. Not definitely, not with the performed composure he wore in public, just directly. The way people look at each other when the thing between them is too real for any kind of performance. You knew, Min-seok said. His voice was quiet, not a question. For 11 weeks, Leo said. Why didn't you come to me? Leo was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but the words were careful, chosen with the precision of someone who had thought about how to answer this question for a very long time. Because if I came to you without proof, they would have turned it back on you. Make you doubt yourself. Made you doubt me. A pause. I needed you to be able to see it clearly, without anything they could use against it. Min-seok absorbed this. And the tutor, he said. You engineered her to be here. I needed someone you couldn't accuse of being part of your world, Leo said. Someone they hadn't reached. Someone with the right skills and the right distance. He glanced briefly at Zariah. I made a list. She was the only person on it. Leo spent 11 weeks protecting a father who didn't know he needed protecting, and never once asked for credit. If that hits you somewhere quiet, drop a comment and tell us, who in your life would go this far for you without saying a word? This channel tells stories because stories like this deserve to be heard. Min-seok was quiet for a long time after that. Not the uncomfortable silence of a man who doesn't know what to say. The silence of a man sitting inside a feeling too large to speak around immediately. He looked at his son, this 7-year-old boy who had spent nearly 3 months building a counterintelligence operation under the library floor, who had recruited a stranger and orchestrated an undercover mission and guided a woman through a blacked-out estate and still found time to be, in Zariah's professional assessment, the most rigorous analytical thinker she had ever encountered. And something in his face changed in a way that was very private and very permanent. He stood up. I walked around the desk and put his hand on Leo's shoulder, not with the formal restraint of a man performing fatherhood, but with the particular grip of someone who needed the physical reality of that contact to confirm that what they were feeling was real. Leo did not move. He looked straight ahead, but his hands, still clasped behind his back, tightened for exactly 1 second. Zariah found something in the room that needed looking at. She looked at it for a little while. When Min-seok spoke again, he was looking at her. I owe you more than I know how to express in a language that's appropriate for this room, he said. You don't owe me anything, Zariah said. Leo is the one who did the work. I just helped carry it. You carried it through a blackout with a compound and a jewelry case, he said. Something in his voice had shifted, still measured, still controlled, but with an undertone that hadn't been there before. Something almost warm. That's not nothing. It was a very good compound, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to one she had seen on his face, and she noted it the way she noted everything, carefully and with interest. She booked her flight home on a Thursday. She hadn't decided to leave. It had simply become clear, the way practical things become clear when you let them sit long enough, that the job she had been recruited for was complete. The syndicate members had been dealt with through channels that Minso controlled, and she did not need to understand in detail. The estate was secure. Leo's intelligence files had been formally preserved and verified. There was nothing left for a jewelry consultant from Lagos to do inside a Seoul Mafia estate, and staying beyond her purpose would mean becoming something other than what she had come here to be. She told Leo on a Wednesday morning. He was at his desk when she walked in, doing what appeared to be advanced mathematics for no particular reason, which she had come to understand was simply what Leo did when he had spare mental capacity and no assigned task. He looked up. I looked at her expression. I looked back at the page. When? He asked. Saturday, she said. He nodded once. Said nothing for a moment. Then, your return flight. Did you book the window seat? I always book the window seat. The overnight from Incheon to Lagos has turbulence over the Arabian Peninsula between the 3rd and 4th hours, he said, still looking at his page. It's minor, but you should know. Did you just look up my flight? I looked up all plausible flight options on Thursday evening and determined which one you would most likely choose based on your established preferences and current availability. A pause. Yes. Zariah sat down in her chair. The one that had been placed beside his, already there, already waiting, on the day she'd first come to this room. She looked at the side of his face for a moment. Leo. I know, he said. You're going to be fine. I know that too. He turned to Paige. I'm not worried about being fine. I'm thinking about efficiency. Of what? He reached into the drawer of his desk and produced a document, printed, bound with a small binder clip, 4 pages long. He placed it in front of her. The cover page read, Proposal for Ongoing Strategic Consulting Partnership. Brooks, John, International Security Intelligence? Zariah stared at it. I drafted it in April, Leo said. Of course you did. The compensation structure is on page 3. I think you'll find it competitive. Page 4 outlines the response time expectations, which are negotiable within reason. He paused. The reason has parameters. I've defined them. Zariah picked up the document. I looked at page 3. The compensation figure was, in fact, competitive. Significantly more than competitive. She turned to page 4. The response time parameters were detailed, organized, and featured a footnote that read, Note, emergency consultations require a minimum 20-minute response window. This accounts for reasonable human sleep cycles, which the party of the first part acknowledges are non-negotiable biologically, regardless of operational urgency. She looked up. Leo was watching her read with the expression of someone trying very hard not to look like they were waiting for an answer. You wrote a footnote about my sleep schedule, she said. It's a standard operational consideration. In a document you wrote about me, specifically, it applies to all consultants. A pause. There is currently one consultant. Zariah turned back to page 1. Read it again, more slowly this time. Read the careful, precise language of a child who had structured a professional proposal the way he structured everything. With thoroughness, with logic, with the kind of long-range thinking that most people his age were applying exclusively to where they wanted to sit at lunch. She thought about the library, the 3 screens, the 11 weeks of documentation, the tracker the size of a shirt button, the pre-programmed floor panel that had lit her way through a blacked-out estate, the second stool that had already been waiting beside his chair. I'll review it, she said. Something in Leo's face softened, just slightly, just briefly, before he composed it back into neutral. Page 3 is the most important page, he said. You said page 4 was negotiable. The parameters are negotiable. The principle is not. He turned back to his mathematics. Safe flight, Zariah. She stood. Picked up the proposal. I walked to the door. Leo. Yes. Thank you for choosing me. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was entirely level and entirely real. You were the only one on the list, he said. There was never a decision to make. She cried on the plane. Just briefly. Over the Arabian Peninsula, during the minor turbulence that arrived exactly when Leo said it would, she pressed her forehead against the window glass and let it happen. Not out of sadness. Out of the particular overwhelming feeling that descends on a person who has been inside something meaningful and is only now, in the quiet and the altitude, allowing themselves to feel the full weight of it. She had come to Seoul to sell diamonds. She was leaving with something she hadn't known she was missing. The specific kind of purpose that comes not from a job description, but from being exactly the right person, in exactly the right place, for someone who needed precisely what you had to offer. The turbulence passed. She dried her face, opened her laptop. The proposal was on page 3. She read it twice. She was still thinking about the footnote when Lagos came into view below her. The sprawl of it, the light of it, the particular color of home from above. And something settled in her chest that felt like arrival. Her apartment on a Friday morning looked exactly the way she'd left it. Orderly, sunlit. The smell of the particular candle she burned when she worked from home drifted from the living room where she'd left it burning on a timer. Everything in its place. Everything is quietly waiting. She made coffee, sat at her desk, opened her emails. The work had stacked up in the weeks she'd been away. 3 client inquiries, a collection evaluation request from a Johannesburg house, 2 invoices requiring sign-off. She worked through it with the focused efficiency of someone whose professional reflexes had not, despite everything, atrophied during an involuntary intelligence operation in Seoul. By mid-afternoon, she was settled. By evening, she was almost, back inside the quiet, profitable, drama-free professional life she had left a flight in an entire world ago. Her phone buzzed at 9:42. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Seoul country code. She picked up. The message was text, not a call. 4 lines. Clean and direct in the way she had come to understand was simply how this particular family communicated. Ms. Brooks. I am told the jollof rice in the Lekki area has been described as exceptional. I am also told the variations between Lagos and Port Harcourt preparations constitute a significant point of local debate. I would value your expert assessment on this matter, as preliminary intelligence suggests the topic is both complex and strongly held. Minseok John. Zariah read it again, set the phone face down on the desk. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen, stood at the counter for approximately 30 seconds, with her hand pressed flat on the surface and her eyes closed. Then she walked back, picked up the phone, typed, "The Lekki versus Port Harcourt debate is not a matter for casual intelligence gathering. It requires field research, personal testimony, and a minimum of 3 restaurant visits to form a defensible position. I will require a budget and a reasonable timeline. Z. Brooks." She sent it, sat back. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. "Budget approved. Timeline whenever you're ready. Also, Leo wanted me to confirm that you received the proposal. He has asked me twice. He pretends he hasn't." Zariah laughed, fully properly with her whole chest. The way she had laughed in the library that first afternoon when a 7-year-old boy had told her he'd started drafting their plan in February and seemed to think this was entirely reasonable. She typed back, "Tell him I'm on page 3. Another buzz. Almost immediate. He says, "That's the most important page." Zariah put the phone down, looked out her Lagos window at the city she loved and the life she'd built in it. I thought about a library in Seoul with a hidden floor and 3 screens and a second stool already waiting. I thought about a boy who had looked at a room full of the most dangerous men in the city and decided that the most useful person in it was the woman sitting alone, minding her business near the back wall. She opened the proposal to page 3, picked up a pen, and started reading. Minseok John just submitted a formal intelligence request about jollof rice. Leo is pretending he didn't ask twice, and Zariah is on page 3. If this story made you feel something real, subscribe, Because the people who show up for stories like this are exactly the kind of community this channel was built for. And if you're on Team Lagos Jolliffe or Team Port Harcourt, drop it in the comments because honestly, that debate might be more dangerous than anything that happened in Seoul.